wave, shock wave, radio wave, microwave, heat wave, brain wave. A wave is a wiggle in space and time, like an ocean wave it moves up and down, repeating in cycles of up and down. The up is called the crest and the trough is the down. The wavelength is the distance from crest to crest or trough to trough. Into a puddle, raindrops drop and water waves roll off. A wave carries energy as it goes. Sound waves make air molecules rock and roll. To and fro and to and fro, from speaker to ear, that's how they go. Sound waves make air molecules rock and roll. The frequency is the rate that sound waves make air molecules shake. The higher the freak, the higher the pitch, and the faster the molecules twitch. The bigger the bell, the longer the wavelength, and the slower the air shakes. The smaller the bell, the shorter the wavelength, and the faster the air shakes. Tune into my frequency and do the freaky wave with me. Sound waves make me rock and roll, up and down and to and fro. Microwaves cook your casserole, making water molecules rock and roll. Wave it up, heat it up, eat it up. Physics, yum yum.
Welcome to the Performing Arts Series, brought to you by the Kennedy Center and the Prince William Network. My name is Yvonne, and the instrument I play is called the cello.
I'm Laurel, and I play the horn.
I'm Phil, and I play the trumpet.
I'm Truman, and I play the bassoon.
And I'm Jeff, and I play the bass.
And we're all members of the National Symphony Orchestra. And we're here today to talk about connections between science and music. We'd like to start by playing a piece that Phil wrote for us, and it's called Fanfare. Probably all of you have done experiments with sound, even if you didn't call them that. Have you ever tried this that Laurel is demonstrating? As you heard in the piece that we just played, we make a wide variety of sounds. Now, scientists study sounds in a way that's very different from musicians, so let's start making our connections between science and music by looking at some of the ways that we produce sound on our instruments. Phil, let's start with you and tell us, how do brass players make a sound?
Well, all brass players make their sounds by buzzing their lips into the instrument. Now you can try that by saying the letter M and buzzing air across your lips. It sounds something like this. Can you guys try that? Very good. Don't spit on the person in front of you or anything. But if you can do that, you can play a brass instrument. So I'm going to show you how I put that all together, because I'm going to buzz my lips, and then I'm going to put the mouthpiece up to my lips, and then I'm going to put the trumpet up to my lips, and see what happens when I add all these ingredients. That's how it all works.
And if any of you play the trumpet, I'm sure that you realize how hard that is that Phil just demonstrated. Well, let's go to Truman. Truman, do you use a mouthpiece when you play the bassoon?
No, on a double reed instrument, you produce a sound by vibrating a reed. This is a big mock-up that I brought along. And it's similar to a folded over blade of grass. But before I can play my bassoon, I first need to make the reed that I'll play on. Now, the reed itself comes from a plant which is related to bamboo. It takes me about an hour to shape this cane, measure it, shave it down, and when I'm finished, I can make a sound like this on the reed by itself. Then when I attach the reed to the bassoon, the vibrating reed gets the column of air moving inside the bassoon, and this is the sound you hear.
Very good.
Now that's a very different way to make sound than the instruments in the string family do. As you may have noticed when we were playing earlier, Yvonne and I can play our string instruments either with a bow, these are our bows, or we can pluck the strings with our fingers. That has a great Italian name, it's called pizzicato, and those two things can make the strings vibrate. When the strings vibrate, the sound passes through the bridge, that's this piece here. Then it goes inside and it travels through a piece of wood that looks like this. It's called a sound post. You can't see it because it's inside the instrument. The sound waves bounce around inside and they come out through these big holes that are called F holes because they're shaped like fancy letter Fs, like back in the old days people used to write with a quill pen. And whatever string instrument you're playing, a violin, cello, or bass, they use the same method to produce sound. It's just a different size of instrument. Here's an example.
One thing that's in common for all instruments is that something has to vibrate in order to produce a sound. Now, these vibrations pass through the air as sound waves. Did you know that you can see sound waves? Well, if you use a special software, which actually you can download off the internet and play with at home, you can see patterns that sound waves make. Now, this first picture that you see, this is called a spectrogram, and it's of a bird song. And what you're seeing is a pattern that these sounds make. Let's listen to it. Now, this next picture that you're seeing is a pattern, it's music that a composer wrote in order to sound like birdsong. And you see that the pattern on the screen looks a lot different than the actual birdsong. So let's see what this music sounds like. And this last picture, this is a pattern of the sounds that whales make when they're talking to each other. This next picture looks very different. These are the patterns that your voice makes when you say the words 1, 2, or 3. And if we're ever going to be able to communicate with our computers by talking to them, our computer is going to have to analyze the patterns that our voice makes in order to be able to tell what it is that we're saying. Now, as Jeff explained a minute ago, a string vibrating in the air doesn't make a very loud sound. It needs to bounce around inside of your instrument so that the sound waves are reflected and amplified. In scientific terms, we call this body of the instrument a resonating chamber. And I'm sure that you know about resonating chambers. If you've ever shouted inside of a tunnel, or maybe you're the kind of person who likes to sing in the shower. Well, we have several different sizes and shapes of resonating chambers here. This one is a very tiny violin. Now, if you go to a symphony orchestra concert, you're not going to see violins this size. This is a violin that my daughter used when she was 3 years old. It's a student-sized violin. And you know from your own personal experience that smaller instruments have higher pitches than large instruments. Think about the trumpet and the tuba. Well, it's the same in the string family. Now, if we play that same tune on the bass, same notes, but much bigger instrument, so it's a much lower sound, isn't it? Well, you know, there are some really neat experiments we can do with string instruments, but first let's develop a hypothesis. How about if we see whether strings with the same pitch have the same length? This is pretty interesting. There's an A string on this tiny violin that we call A440. And what we're going to do is we're going to measure these strings because we do lots of measurements in science, don't we? Now, you've probably heard about A440 because that's the note that we tune to in the orchestra. Why is it called A440? Well, it's called A because pitches were given letter names, A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. And this string is vibrating 440 times a second. That means it has a frequency of 440 cycles per second, or 440 hertz. The name Hertz comes from the man Heinrich Hertz, who first discovered radio waves. Jeff, can you bring that tape measure over here, and let's see if we can get it on the camera. Measure the length of this A string, see how long it is.
Well, Yvonne, it looks like it's about 9 and a half inches long.
Okay. Maybe you can play it. Jeff used to play the violin, believe it or not.
Small.
He's going to play that A string, and I'm going to play my cello A string and see if they're the same pitch. Oh, mine is lower, isn't it? Well, somebody discovered that if you divide a string in half, you double the frequency. You raise the pitch by an octave. So now I have the same pitch, so Jeff's going to measure this part of the string and see how long that is.
Yvonne, the string is 13 and a half inches long.
Oh no, they're not the same length at all. Hey, you have an A string on your bass,
true.
let's measure that.
Right.
Okay, we have one more instrument to put into our experiment. I'll take the tape measure, you get your bass, and we need to get this A, don't we?
Yeah, let's see if
What's
I got
your A? All right, divide your string in half. Oh no. One more. Okay, now he's got the same pitch. Let's see if he has the same length. Oh gosh, no, it's just like 5.5 inches. Oh, I hate it when my experiments don't work. What's going on? Well, let's take a look at a data table and see if, oh look, we had all these completely different results, didn't we? And you know, when you're doing your science experiment, close is not good enough. Well, what's going on here? Well, I asked an engineer at a string manufacturing company, and he sent me this diagram and these equations, and he explained to me strings are made of different materials, and when you stretch them at different tensions, you get different results, and that's why our hypothesis is false.
Well, Yvonne, our hypothesis did turn out to be false, but at least we learned why. And also we learned a new thing along the way, which is that if you divide a string in half, you double the frequency of the pitch. Well, Yvonne and I are going to play a short piece now to see if you can tell just by using your ears and not your eyes when I'm playing a tune on my bass and when Yvonne's playing a tune on her cello. Now, the difference in the quality of sound that helps you to tell which instrument's playing, even when they're playing the exact same notes, is called the timbre. Now, why don't you close your eyes? We're going to play a little bit of the piece and listen and let your ears do all the work. All right, you can open your eyes now. Could you tell which instrument was playing the melody at which time? That difference is because each instrument has a different timbre. Now we're going to play the whole piece for you, and at the end we're going to have a little fun with timbre.
What's up? I said, hey, what's up? Yeah, you guys awake? Good. Well, that was a kind of ancient wake-up call. And the things that Yvonne and Jeff were demonstrating just now were discovered hundreds of years ago by a guy named Pythagoras. Can you guys say Pythagoras? Pythagoras. Now, if your name was Pythagoras, hi, I'm Bill Pythagoras, you might get grief through your entire junior high career. But in Greece, hundreds of years ago, that wasn't a very uncommon name. And this was a very smart man because he figured out that different lengths of strings vibrated at different pitches. Now, I don't have any strings in this particular instrument, but I do have a column of air. And when I vibrate my lips into it, that column of air vibrates. Well, hundreds of years ago, that was really important because when they discovered this made a really loud sound, they figured out they could do things with it. And because they didn't have a lot of fancy forms of communication, this was very useful. So if I were in trouble, I might play something like this on this conch shell, and I might get a response. Let's see what kind of response I might get if I play something. Well, that's Laurel in the wings, and she's playing another kind of instrument you buzz your lips into called a shofar, or a ram's horn. And she can play a few more notes in her shofar than I can in this, on this conch shell. So let's see if you play a few more notes on your instrument. Well, that was really useful for signaling, and they had all kinds of different signals that meant different things, but you couldn't really play a whole song on it. So years later, they discovered if you made these instruments that you buzz your lips into out of pieces of brass tubing, you could play a whole bunch more notes and play a song. You could play a whole lot of things on this thing, and it had a lot more notes than just the ram's horn and the conch shell, the lowest of which is called the fundamental. And you wouldn't want to play songs on that, but when a column of air vibrates in this horn, or when a length of string vibrates, not only does the whole length vibrate and gives a pitch an octave, but the half the length vibrates and gives a pitch an octave higher, and then it vibrates in thirds. We also have a column vibrating in fourths and fifths, etc. And for each different length, we get a different pitch. If we play those pitches one after another, it sounds just like this. We call these pitches the harmonic series. Individually, they're also known as partials or overtones. This guy, Hermann Helmholtz, There he is. Did a lot of experiments with partials in the 1800s. Part of what makes each instrument sound different is that you hear different numbers and strengths of partials in their sounds. So, which you can see in this picture here. It was centuries after Pythagoras before anyone put the notes of the harmonic series together in a pattern that we know today as the scale. So I'm going to play a scale for you on this instrument, and then I'll play a piece of music that uses scales. And that's how it all works. Thanks.
Now, so far, the wind instruments that we've played have been fairly small, easy to carry around. Phil's conch shell, of course, is a shell. My horn is the horn of an African antelope. And I also have a slightly larger instrument with me that's carved from the trunk of a single tree, a spruce tree.
Keep coming, right there, good.
Thank you. This is my Alp horn. It's 12 feet long. And it also plays in a harmonic series, just like Phil demonstrated on the trumpet. So. Now, as I said, this is 12 feet long, and it's quite difficult to carry around. This instrument does come apart into 3 pieces, but even so, it's still rather unwieldy. My horn also is 12 feet long, but as you can see, it's all wound around, and it's much easier to carry and also much easier to play. A more modern invention was the invention of valves and keys for this instrument, which enable us to play many more notes than were available on a conch shell or an alp horn or a shofar or a natural trumpet, which is what Phil was playing. The keys open and close sections of pipe which either raise or lower the pitch, and so we can play a whole lot more notes than previously was possible. So now we're going to play a short piece of music which demonstrates the technique of the modern brass instruments. I'm emptying the water out of my horn.
How'd you get water into your horn?
Well, actually, there is a scientific explanation. The air that's in my lungs is warm. It's at body temperature. My horn is room temperature, about 20 degrees cooler. So when I blow into the horn, the moisture in my breath condenses inside the horn, and that condensation makes droplets of water, which will make little bubbly noises if I don't constantly empty out the horn.
Oh, are you sure it's not spit?
No, it's not spit. Actually, we could ask Truman to come out to the stage because bassoonists also have to deal with the problem of condensation in their instruments.
Okay, what was the question again?
Truman, can you tell us about your condensation problems?
Sure. As Laurel explained, warm air from my lungs can condense inside part of the bassoon called the bocal. It's made of metal. And we have to drain it out by taking it out of the instrument and then blowing in this end like that. And I have to make sure, of course, that there's nobody sitting behind me when I do that. This might be a good time for the three of us to play the timbre game again for you. The sound of the horn, the bassoon, and the cello are all in the same range. Close your eyes and listen carefully as we play a scale and see if you can tell when the next instrument begins to play. All right, now we'll try playing a short piece for you, which will be a little bit harder. But see if you can correctly tell which instrument is playing, even with your eyes closed. We mentioned earlier that each of us has a different way of playing our instrument. Yvonne and Jeff use a blow or pluck with their fingers. I use a double reed, here's that copy again, and Phil and Laurel use mouthpieces. Now, what kind of science do you suppose could be involved with all of this? Well, surprisingly, there's a lot of science here. For example, how a note starts is called attack. How the note ends is called decay. You can see clearly in these pictures that the sound is distinctive for each instrument that we play. There's some fascinating experiments being done with attack and decay, which prove that our ears can sometimes be fooled a bit. Let's listen to this. The reason that last one sounded so strange is that you heard the decay, that's the end of the note, first. And the attack, you heard at the beginning, where you would expect the first to be. Now, if you think that's strange for your ears, listen to this mysterious melody and raise your hand if you think you can identify the tune.
How about right here in the front row? Shout it out. Yeah, you. No, he doesn't know. Who else? Somebody might know that one? How about right there in about the fourth row? Twinkle, twinkle, little star. Was that it? Oops.
Good try, though.
Maybe you better tell them what it was.
Right? Let me play the tune as in the octave that you're used to hearing it. See if you recognize it then.
Everybody shout it out. That's right.
Okay. In the electronic version that you just heard, all the notes were in the correct order, but they were played in the wrong octave. Now let me play it with the electronic version, and since you know what to listen for now, so you've heard it once, see if you can hear the tune as I play along.
Could you hear it that time? Sometimes you have to practice with those a little bit until they become really comfortable. Well, you know what? Scientists don't fully understand yet why our ears get fooled with experiments like these, but they do understand a lot about how our ears work. There are even some attempts made at producing artificial ears. This man is wearing what's called a cochlear implant. You see how he has something attached to his scalp behind his ear. Well, in the next picture, you'll see a little bit of how this cochlear implant works. The signal comes in up here to this microphone implanted behind his ear, and it goes down to a microprocessor he wears at his belt. And in the next picture, you see how that is sent up to another processor inside of his ear, buried deep inside the ear, where the sound waves are changed into electronical impulses that your brain understands. One of the reasons we know how to make these type of artificial ears is that scientists have some very elaborate tools these days, including scanning electron microscopes. And with these microscopes, they can see details inside our ears. Now, this picture is inside your ear, but it's been colorized so that you can see the details better. You don't really have purple and yellow and blue inside of your ears. In the upper right-hand corner of this image, you see something which is magnified in the next picture, and we see, thanks to the scanning electron microscope, when we make this larger, that these are V-shaped rows of hair cells. And these little tiny hair cells are what change the sound waves to electrical impulses that your brain interprets as some kind of a sound. In the next picture, you'll see that some of the hair cells are missing. They could be missing because maybe this person had some kind of an illness. Maybe this person has gotten very old, or maybe this person has spent a lifetime working around very loud noises. In any case, once these hair cells disappear, they do not grow back. And if you start to lose your hearing, it's not reversible. We only get one set of ears in our lifetime, so we need to be very careful with them. And if any of you like to listen to loud music occasionally, then you might be interested in knowing how you can protect your ears. The intensity of sound, or loudness, is measured in bells, which are rather large units, ranging from barely audible to deafening. We divide the bells into 10 parts to make the measurements more meaningful, and that's where we get the name decibel. So Jeff and Phil have prepared a little demonstration for you to show us how loud is too loud. Go ahead. We've come to the part of our program that we enjoy the most now, which is trying to answer some of your questions. And these questions can be about us, or about our instruments, or about the program. So we'd like to invite those of you who are not here in the studio with us to get on the phone and call us. The number is 800-578-1396. Now, here in the auditorium, we have about 900 students, so while we're waiting for your phone calls, we're going to start with some of the students here. Go ahead, what's your question?
What is the Alp horn made of?
What is the Alp horn made of? Laurel, you want to tell us a little bit about that?
The Alp horn is carved from a single tree. It's actually made from Sitka spruce. And if you can see the shape of the alphorn, you'll see that the bottom is curved, and that was where the tree grew out of a mountainside and then reached straight up to the sky to reach for the sunlight. But these were used in Switzerland first, a very, very long time ago, for the shepherds used to use alphorns to call their flocks and bring them in at night, etc.
Okay, we have another question right here.
How much do you practice?
How much do you practice? Truman?
Probably a couple of hours, 3-4 times a week, and then maybe a little less on the other 2 or 3 days.
Phil, how much do you have to practice?
Well, it depends on how much I'm performing that week, but I try to get at least an hour and a half to 2 hours in a day. But if I'm performing a lot, brass players, we can't play endlessly like string players can, it seems like sometimes. I practice less if I have a lot of performing that day. But in college, I tried to practice 2.5 hours a day, something like that.
Laurel, is that about the same for you?
Yeah, when I was younger, I used to practice at least 2-3 hours a day. And then same as what Phil is saying, now I play probably 6 or 7 hours a day, but much of that is rehearsing, not actually individual practice.
Jeff, is it different for you?
Well, it varies a lot. It depends on whether the music I'm working on is especially hard or not. Sometimes the music is really difficult, sometimes it's less so. So if I'm having a hard week of practicing, I might be practicing for 3 or 4 hours every day. Then some weeks it might just be 1 or 2 hours a day.
Okay, what's our next question?
What are your strings made of?
What are our strings made of? My strings, actually, I have 2 different types of strings on them, and one of them has a very precious metal wound around it called tungsten, which is a very expensive metal. And I have 2 strings that are wrapped in steel, and I have another one that's wrapped in chrome. How about yours? Do you have
My strings are all wrapped in steel. Bass strings are wrapped in steel, and also the inside of the string is made out of nylon, like that you make clothes out of. Strings used to be made out of all sorts of stuff. In the really old days, strings were made out of the guts of animals.
We have a call coming in from Panama City, Florida. Caller, give us your question, please.
How long does it take to get as good as you guys play?
How long does it take to get as good as we are?
Yeah.
Well, I guess we'd have to ask how old we were when we started. Laurel, how old were you?
I was barely 10 years old when
Phil?
I started.
I was 10 years old.
Truman?
Well, I played clarinet, started in the 5th grade, and I switched to bassoon when I was a freshman in high school.
Jeff?
Well, I started the bass when I was 13 years old.
And I started playing cello when I was 9. And I think in order to be a professional, you probably have to count on a good, hard 10 years of work to get to a pretty high level of performing ability. We have another question here in the studio.
Why does she stick her hand in the horn?
Good question, Laurel. Maybe we can get a camera on that so you can show what's going on inside of your horn.
I'm glad you asked that because there's kind of a fun demonstration. At first, people used to just use the hand in the bell just to hold the instrument up. Sometimes they would hold it like this with 2 hands on the ring part. But this is also comfortable. And players noticed that by changing the position of the hand in the bell, they can actually change the note and also the timbre of the note. So if we could, where would you like me? If we could get a camera on my hand. There you go, thank you. I'm going to start out with my hand wide open and then cover the bell, and you won't be able to miss the change in sound.
We have a call now from Miami, Florida. Go ahead, caller. What's your question?
If we did not have any sound waves, would living things be able to hear?
If we didn't have sound waves, would we be able to hear?
Yes.
I don't think so. Because if we didn't have sound waves, then nothing would be entering our ear in order for us to hear it as a sound. We have another question in the studio.
How old are your instruments?
How old? Who has an old one? Is your bass really old, Jeff?
My bass is about 175 years old. Yeah.
Jeff is not 175
I'm not
years
175.
old. Laurel's horn is?
Horn is almost 2 years old.
Phil, how old's your trumpet?
It's only 1 year old. It was made last year.
Truman?
Truman's bassoon was made in 1996.
And that's the same year that my cello was made, 1996. But I have to tell you a very funny story about my bow, which is that the tip of the bow used to always be made of ivory. But as you know, elephants are on the endangered species list, and you cannot harvest ivory anymore. So when the piece of ivory broke, my repairman replaced it with a piece of mammoth bone, which is actually 10,000 years old. We have a call now from Haydenville, Virginia. Caller, you're on the air. What's your question?
Yes. I am an uilleann pipe player, and I was just going to ask the bassoon player, where were they made? Because they have the same behavioral read through the chanters and such. I was just going to ask them who made them and when were they made, because I have no idea.
Can you tell us again what the instrument was?
The Irish uilleann pipe.
Irish uilleann pipes.
Well, I'm not familiar with that instrument. The bassoon was used probably first in the 16th century. There was a small instrument about half this size, which is doubled on itself. If I take this bottom piece off, you can see that there's a little tube here. So that we start here, run down to the tube, and come all the way back up. And so this idea was made so that the instrument would be small enough that I could actually play it. If there were no tube here, it'd be 8 feet long. Yeah, made in Germany, that's right.
Yeah, his bassoon is made in Germany. And we now have a call from Naples, Florida. Caller, what's your question?
Yeah, my question is that horn that comes from Sweden appears to be at least six feet long. How do they make the hole down the center of that? That comes from a tree.
The instrument is an alp horn, and it's from Switzerland, and it's 12 feet long. How do they get the hole down the middle?
The trunk of the tree is split longitudinally, and then the heart of the tree, like the marrow of a bone, is carved out by hand with a carving knife, and then two parts of the tree are put back together again. If you can see these little ridges all the way down. This is actually wrapped with bamboo all the way in a long spiral all the way up to the top, and that's what holds the two parts of the trunk together. So it was first split and then carved out and then put back together again.
We have another question from the studio. Go ahead.
Does anyone play the alp horn today?
There are actually quite a few alp horn enthusiasts, typically more in mountain communities because they sound wonderful when played from a mountaintop. The sound echoes all over the valley. Of course, the alp horn is still very, very popular in Switzerland, and it's also popular in the Rocky Mountains, particularly the Canadian Rocky Mountains. My instrument was carved by a Canadian alp horn maker.
Another question from the studio.
How do you produce the different pitches on the alp horn?
Lots of alp horn questions.
Really, all of these instruments, conch shell, shofar, natural trumpet, French horn, alp horn, they all work the same way by making the tension of your lips tighter or stronger tension, the pitch will go up. If I can do, like Phil's demonstration, and I did that simply by tightening what's called the aperture, tightening the hole in my lips, and that made the pitch go up. That's how all the brass instruments work.
Our next call comes to us from Atlantic City, New Jersey. Go ahead, caller.
Yeah, I just wanted to know if you're going to play that really long horn.
It sounds like we could do an entire program on alp horns here today. Laurel, go ahead, play the alp horn for us again. I think that would be a big hit with everybody. Another question here in the studio.
What other music groups do you play with?
What other groups do we play with? Once in a while I play in a string quartet, mostly for fun or for a special program. Phil, you play in some different groups.
Yeah, I just got back from a 3-week tour with the Baltimore Symphony of Europe, and also I have a brass group called the Washington Symphonic Brass that I started, and we're a 17-piece brass group. So I keep busy with other groups as well.
And Laurel and Truman both play in a group together. What you want to tell us about that, Truman?
Sure, it's a woodwind quintet. That's flute, oboe, clarinet, bassoon, and French horn. Laura and I play. It's a capital woodwind quintet here in Washington, D.C.
Jeff, you play in some other groups?
Well, actually, I, along with some other people here, play in what's called a chamber orchestra. It's like a regular orchestra, only smaller, called the Eclipse Chamber Orchestra in Washington also.
We have a call now from Arbutus, Maryland. Go ahead, caller.
Yeah, I wanted to know, first of all, which instrument puts out the most sound? And second of all, how come you guys don't have a trombone up there?
Well, the second question is probably easier to answer. Why don't we have a trombone? We put the group together to demonstrate certain scientific principles, and we figured that 2 brass instruments kind of covered all those brass questions. And the other question, which instrument produces the most sound? I would probably say that right here on the stage, Phil could probably play louder than any of the rest of us. Would we all agree?
But trombone would be louder than me.
Trombone would be louder, that's true. We have another question in the studio.
Do strings ever break?
Oh, yes. We had a famous example in the orchestra last week in rehearsal where the first violinist was playing a solo, and right in the middle of the solo that she was playing, boing, a string broke. So she had to stop and put a new one on, and then she went right back ahead to playing. So it does happen. I understand that on the bass it's a little more exciting sometimes.
It's true. Bass strings are much thicker than the strings of other string instruments, and when they break, it's like an explosion. It sounds like a gun going off, and the string flies way up in the air. It doesn't happen too often, but it's pretty exciting when it does happen, as long as you aren't in the way.
And we have a call from Richmond, Virginia. Go ahead, please.
We all know light is measured in speed. Is sound also measured in speed?
I'm sorry, I don't think I understood that. Can you ask it again, please?
I said light is measured in speed.
Right.
So is sound also measured in speed?
I'm sorry, yes. The speed of light, sound travels quite a bit slower at about 1,100 feet per second. Light travels at 186,000 miles per second. So the speed of sound is much slower, but it depends on what the sound is traveling through, because sound traveling through water travels at a different speed than sound traveling through air. Do we have another question here in the studio?
Do you play any other instruments?
Do we play any other instruments? Laurel does.
I love to play piano. I used to play cello and flute just for my enjoyment when I was in high school, and I also love to sing in my church choir.
Phil, do you play anything else?
Other than all the different trumpets, I compose, but I don't really perform on any other instrument.
How about you, Truman?
I played clarinet earlier when I was in 5th grade, and I still play piano, but not well enough to perform, mostly for composing.
We have a question from Waldorf, Maryland. What is the question, please?
Hi, I was just wondering, what is the difference between a natural trumpet and the trumpet bit?
Okay, well,
if we can get a
trumpet,
camera.
as you can see, has brass tubing, but has no valves, and so I have to perform on that solely by buzzing my lips and making my lips tighter or looser. And on this trumpet, the regular trumpet that you see when you come here, the National Symphony, we have valves, and we can help produce those pitches by pushing different buttons.
We're going to try to get in one more question from the studio here. Go ahead.
Are all the string instruments made of different wood?
Well, there are several kinds of wood in each instrument. Typically, the top is made from spruce, and the back also, I don't know if yours is, a spruce back.
Actually, the back of basses are made from maple.
Maple, which is a much harder wood. The bridges are made from maple, and the fingerboards are made from ebony. And, okay, now Jeff has metal pegs. I have wooden pegs on my cello. These are made of rosewood. So we have a number of different kinds of woods that our instruments are made of. Unfortunately, we've just about run out of time. So we hope you that enjoyed our program and that it's given you some new ways to think about science and to think about music. Now, if you didn't get a chance to ask the question that is on your lips, why don't you email us? There's a web address up on your screen, and you can ask us additional questions right up until December 21st. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll do our best to answer your questions. You can also find additional information about us classroom activities that integrate the arts into your curriculum, and information on upcoming programs at the Kennedy Center website, which is also listed on your screen. We're interested in hearing what you think about today's program and about the Kennedy Center Performing Arts Series in general. So we have an electronic evaluation form, which is on the Prince William Network website. And we would like to have you fill this out so we can select topic and resources that you might need to enhance your classroom experience. The next live performance is Wednesday, February 6th, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, when Dr. Billy Taylor and his trio with guest artist Byron Stripling will perform and celebrate jazz and the legacy of Louis Armstrong. Now we have one more piece that we'd like to play together for you, but before we do that, we want to ask, is there anybody out here who has a birthday today or maybe this week? Oh, you do. You want to come up here on the stage? Come on up. Oh, we have two of you. Come right over here. First of all, you have to tell me your name.
Tiara Kelly.
Tiara?
Yes.
Okay, and your name is?
Reagan.
Reagan. And we have another one.
Shondell.
Shondell. How old are you guys?
10, about to turn 11.
You're going to turn 11, and
I'm going to turn 11. 11.
So we have 3 11-year-olds here. Now, you know, what are you guys expecting to get for your birthday? What do 11-year-old girls like to get these days?
Shoes.
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 That's going to be a lot of shoes. And, you know, all I brought with me is 2 sets of earplugs. Did you guys ever get earplugs for your birthday before?
No.
Well, today's your lucky day. I'm sorry, I've got another set backstage, so if you hang around later, I'll be happy to give you some later. Did you think when you came here today that you were going to be on stage with members of the National Symphony? No. Well, if you want to go back down to your seats, we have a little special happy birthday number we'd like to play for you. Let's give these girls a big hand. We started off our program today by making connections between science and music. And our last connection has to do with how scientists solve problems, because many times they take a problem and look at it upside down and inside out in order to solve it. And sometimes their solutions help other scientists and solve problems that they didn't even know they were going to solve. And in music, we often get unexpected results when we look at something very familiar to us. Now, Truman, who's also a composer, looked at the tune Happy Birthday to You, and he said, gee, I know what it sounds like when you play it regularly. But what does it sound like when you play it backward? Or upside down? And what would happen if you had it backwards and upside down? Well, Truman took some of these possibilities and put them together into a new piece, which he calls variations. Now, you're not going to hear the familiar tune right at the beginning, but if you listen carefully, you'll hear some of those variations that we just played, maybe in some different styles for a while. Maybe it'll sound like Bach, and maybe it'll sound Latin. So listen, and thanks for being with us.